Medina Anglin.
And I'm Ellen Peguero.
Welcome to another episode of
A Good Show.
On this episode of A Good Show, we are joined by none other but the Honourable Chris Saunders, MP for Bordentown West. This is the first of two parts of a discussion with the Honourable Mr. Christopher Saunders as he expresses his views on Christian values and the Constitution and other issues that are affecting the Cayman Islands.
Welcome, Mr. MP. It's wonderful to have you here with us this evening.
And thank you very much, and it's great to be here.
The discussions this afternoon are based particularly on Mr. Saunders' contribution to the debate for the vote of no confidence that was heard in the House of Parliament. I've said Legislative Assembly for decades. It's taking some getting used to. House of Parliament on the 14th day of November 2023. In that speech, you mentioned several things that concerned you about the Cayman Islands.
May I?
Sure.
One of the things that you did mention there was the prayer by Peter Ramble, correct? Where where he was praying that we built on foundations that we did not lay, and so forth. Well, actually, that prayer is actually found in Deuteronomy, chapter 6. And that sets out the criteria, for the blessings that when we do what we're supposed to with God. So what I'd like to ask you this evening is exactly what are the duties of the politician to uphold the Constitution as far as it's related to I think it's section 1 of the Constitution, which talks about us being a Christian nation with Christian values and so forth, and those being upheld right there in our parliament by our politicians. Did I make that clear?
Yeah. I think that the main thing that most people need to recognize is that one, the Constitution itself or the laws in any country is all still come from the 10 Commandments. I mean, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. And any you want to slice it and dice it. Now, there are different ways you can steal. Where you're stealing property, where you're stealing real estate, where they're stealing in stocks. So the law is always there, in a sense, to kind of have that level of protection. Because at the end of the day, when people founded government, and I want to emphasize that people founded government and not the other way around, people founded government with 3 primary purposes: to protect their life, to protect their liberties, and to protect their property. And that is in essence where everything comes from. Now, whether you're a Christian nation or not, I mean, every country has those laws there. You shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, and so forth. But in terms of itself, I mean, every one of us as politicians or as elected representative, we go inside knowing what the Constitution is. So there are parts of the Constitution, I can tell you that I would have probably worded it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it is the law of the land, it is the supreme law of the land, and we have an obligation to uphold it as much as well, in all aspects. I mean, whether we agree or disagree with it, I mean, that's just the reality of it. The thing about it is that if people also understand democracy itself, there's also the element of the separation of church and state, where at the end of the day, you look at the US, which is one of the longest continuous democracy that we have. They're enshrined the separation of church and state. And what most people don't realize is that the whole idea behind the separation of church and state was not really to protect religious freedom, but also to protect political freedom. Because at the time when their constitution was written, what was happening? You had a lot of wars going on in Europe. The Pope was pretty much the main man. He decided the kings, the queens, and all that kind of stuff. The Pope had a lot of power. So we have seen throughout the years where, the church, if not tempered, can also become have its own issues too. So it's always a matter of finding the balance. But I think at the end of the day, if you really understand the Christian values, it's really about upholding what it is that God wants for us. None of us is perfect. That's why we have salvation. I try to live my best life. I try to live a good life. But at the end of the day, I too fall short. But you know, I can pray for forgiveness, and as such, you know, we try. So at the end of the day, you want us to promote a society where everyone can just have that opportunity. You can't, people can't be happy, people can't be prosperous in an environment where there's a lot of crime, you know, where there's a lot of struggles and so forth. So you'd have to kind of see it. But once you know, kind of really get down to what it is and have that relationship with God, then I think most people will see that it's actually something different. It's actually something quite beautiful to some extent, you know what I mean? But it is a challenge, because at the end of the day, you really can't legislate morality.
You can't.
You can't legislate principles, but you can just hope that you create an environment for people to live their best life. Just on the drive coming here, I had one young lady who basically was saying to me that, you know, when are we going to do away with the laws, like, you know, on Saturday where we cut off at midnight? And I'm like, it won't be while I'm elected. Because you have to have some balance in society. You have to have some point where you say to people, listen, go home. You just can't have people just out on the streets round the clock. There's times you just have to say, go home. And it's kind of weird, because if you look at the magic that is the Cayman Islands, it is all of the little small things added up that makes us who we are. And I say to someone, don't think that if you come and you change that little piece and change that little piece and change that little piece, at some point you're going to end up changing the essence of who we are. So it is all of the quirks that you like, the good, the bad, you know, the indifferent, that makes it what it is that we are, that makes it work. And you just can't change one piece and think that it won't affect another piece. And that's really what it comes down to. So it's about maintaining that balance. You know, and that is one of the things that we've been trying to push back through, is to get back to the balance.
Well, that's what I was just going to say too. I mean, are we really maintaining that balance? Because when we look at the society and we talk about the fact that, you know, thou shalt not kill, and, you know, we abide by all these laws. You just brought up that this young lady talked about, are we going to uphold the midnight Saturday night? But is that really being upheld? Is there really a balance? Because right now, I mean, music is going way past midnight on a Saturday. The streets are, people are, you know, having all these little corner, or don't know what you want to call it, but hole in the wall sessions in neighborhoods and so forth. So have we really gone too far? I mean, are we really upholding the Constitution?
Well, that part I don't think is actually in the Constitution. That's a separate law.
That's not.
I know. But in the short order, I would say in most cases we are. Where I think the challenge really comes from, and you know, as I said earlier, that it was the people that created government. And I want to step back a little bit and kind of get into the genesis of that statement. If you look in yesteryears gone by, or millennia gone by, people are basically nomadic. They went wherever the buffalo roam, they traveled to. I mean, that's just how life works. But then people came together and they started a community. So the first step, or the first pillar is in society, is people come together at a community level. Then they start trading amongst themselves. They start doing business amongst themselves. In doing so, they create an economy. And as the community grow and the economy grow, they then create a political system. So the natural order of things was community, economy, political. That was the natural order of things. What has happened in a lot of countries around the world now, not just the Cayman Islands, is that the economy is getting a lot of attention, the politics is getting a lot of attention, but the community is now lacking. So a lot of stuff that the community used to do has now been replaced. So when people get up and say, well, the government need to do this and the government need to do that, what they're actually doing is actually making the government branch much more bigger. Or if you want corporate Cayman to do something, you're making the economic side much bigger. When in fact, we need to try really get our more people empowered. And that's why one of the things that I said in one speech, where scientists have calculated the odds of people being born at 400 trillion to 1. I mean, everybody got 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16, I mean, go on. And if you look at your parents coming together, just the act of them getting up one day, they decide they're going to the supermarket, they run into this other spouse, or they meet this one, they meet that one. I mean, it is really, when you look at it, the odds of people coming together is I mean, having a baby is so difficult. As much as, So when you see a person born, the universe wants you here. At odds of 400 trillion to 1, I mean, that is a significant number. So what I started that to say, every single human being is special. Every single one of us is God's children. And for anyone to sit back and try to let someone feel that they're less, when the odds of that person arriving is 400 trillion to 1, the same for you, the same for me. Whether you're rich or you're poor, you're black or you're white, it's the same odds. That means the universe wants you here. You have a purpose. And what we have not done, and I think Mark Twain summed it up best when he said, the two most important days in a person's life is the day they're born and the day they know why. Every single one of us has a purpose. And our job now, as government and as political leaders, is to create that environment for people to find their purpose. And I think just as though we need to find our purpose at an individual level, we also need to find our purpose on a collective level. And that is where we have now fallen, to some extent, fall behind. And if you look at the Cayman Islands, this is not how we started. This was not our magic started. And that is what we need to bring back.
I totally agree with that.
Now, when the historically, the politicians, parliamentarians, ministers in Westminster were passing legislation, they would confer. The Church of England here in Cayman, they would confer with the CMA for controversial or highly ethical or moral legislation. They sought the input from CMA. If CMA became aware of it before their input was sought, CMA reached out. And so we saw where there was a relationship between the church and the state, which then, through the lawmaking process, helped to keep a healthy balance for a healthy society. I think that trade has been worn a bit, and I don't think that consultation process is as it used to be. And I'm not passing judgment as to how it wore down. I'm not saying that the CMA didn't reach out enough. I'm not saying that the politicians didn't seek their counsel. But I think that perhaps it's time for, the politicians to start engaging back with entities such as the CME and the SDA and getting their input. Because if we're going to have a nation of Christian values, there has to be Christian input.
Yes.
Right? Where you spoke just now about the laws of the land coming from Judeo-Christian principles. And if we're going to have a nation where even in tolerance of other religions, knowing how as Christians that we deal with different religions and people's religious views and so on, it has to be because as legislators, there has been an effort to consult with those who understand the Word of God and have those leadership skills in which you can turn to and say, this is what we are thinking. Give us some guidance about how this lines up with the Word of God. Now, even in saying that though, I realize that there are some times that will not be possible. Take for example, if we were going to talk, you're talking about EU financial, FAFTF and all the rest of the acronyms and stuff. Yep. Getting us off the black, gray or blue list, whichever color they choose to have next. And my views on that list I'll reserve, but you wouldn't go running to the CMA for that sort of for guidance in those sort of instances. So it's as applicable on a case-by-case basis. Do you think that it would lend weight and lend support to politicians and make their journey, their legislative journey, something somewhat stronger and more effective toward in their legislative, in dealing with their constituents and the legislative process?
Well, the thing about, I guess I'm a little bit lucky because I have 5 pastors in my constituent that I know of. I have 5 pastors in my constituent, but down west. But the thing about it is this, before we used to have 21 days of consultation, and then we basically had, under the new thing, it moved up to 28 days of consultation. That's why when bills are published, you have 28 days before it can actually get to the floor of the House, unless there is exceptional circumstances that the Premier can ask for the period to be shortened. But in a nutshell, that 28 days is supposed to have the consultation for all bodies, for all parties. And what I can say also is that it's just not a matter of just consulting with just one group. You should try to consult with as broad a group as possible, for the simple fact that when the sun shines on the righteous, it also shines on the unrighteous too. And when we're putting laws in place, having the laws is one thing, but going back to what Ms. Ellen said earlier, where, you look at the Saturday night where, you have people now clearly with these, different sessions that's going on and so forth. There's also then the enforcement of the law, which becomes an issue. So it makes no use to put a law in a book where it reach a point where it would be difficult to enforce. That's one of the things that even caused some issues with me and one previous person that was on island, with basically this issue of buying numbers or selling numbers kind of thing, where it has become so acceptable in the community at this point to try and police that at this point, even though the laws on the books is clear that it is a form of gambling and is not allowed. The truth of the fact is many people in society have turned a blind eye towards the number buying and the number selling, because it has somewhat become acceptable. Now the question is now, and this is why we are pushing to have a referendum to say, well, listen, either we do something to legalize it, or we say we're going to enforce it. But to have a law and not have it being enforced, then that becomes an issue. We see it also with immigration laws. I mean, we see the marriage of conveniences. So there are many laws out there that where we need to have that enforcement. Now, if I was to go and ask the voting public, do you want me to take half of the police resources and put towards people buying or selling numbers? They probably say to me, Chris, no. There are more pressing things for the police to do. Right. But if they come back after a referendum and say, you know what, we definitely want you guys to enforce it, then you go and you give the police the necessary resources, recognizing that the police is definitely need more resources now to basically police something that small. But at least people understand that if we are giving police these resources, well, look less for NAU, look less for different social things, because it's not where you can just go and print money and buy all of these stuff. So it really comes back to a priority. You can't. One of the things in politics that I say to people, and I've said to some of my colleagues, especially the newer ones, not every time you go down the field, you're going to score a goal. Right. But the objective is to keep moving the ball further and further to the goal. That's the reason why when I started out, we built on foundations we did not lay. It is not a matter of coming in every 4 years and trying to undo what the government before you did, but rather to look and see, okay, what did they do that is actually good that we can build on. And the reason why I say that is that the people recognize that many of the problems that we have, there's no magic bullet. People know that. What people want more than anything from their leaders, and this is just my opinion, is that they want us to be aware of the problem, 2, know that we have a plan for the problem, and 3, that eventually the problem can be fixed. It will be fixed. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And I say that to say this. I look at 2 countries, let's use Jamaica and Singapore. I think Singapore went independence probably a year after Jamaica. Now, both countries have been independent for at least 60 years. In that 60 years, Jamaica had 8 prime ministers. Singapore had 3. So what you have is continuation of policies. Some of these problems you can't fix in 4 years. But then everyone campaign that they can be fixed in 4 years. And the truth of the fact is they can't. They can't. Because the social planners have something called a wicked problem. You think you're fixing one problem, but you still create another problem. So it is from that standpoint, once you can have the integrity to say to the electorate, listen, this is going to take a longer time to fix, but we're working on it. We're going to get there bit by bit. Give us some time to do it. And I think that is really the most important thing in all of that.
Okay, let me chime in there for a minute and go back. You say that, for instance, you send the numbers that we know it's on the book, it's against the law. Yep. But now that people sort of accepted and, condoned it. But does that still constitute ignoring it? I don't think so. No. And I'm not saying that you're saying you're ignoring it, but how many laws are on the books? And because we keep getting more pressing matters, but a lot of the pressing matters, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of these pressing matters that we're getting is because these minor laws, who's supposed to help govern and to keep us into that society of consideration and obeying, upholding our laws, are being ignored. Let me try to explain that a little better. Okay, so we're going to ignore, and I'm just using the word ignore, that now the numbers are not something that we need to use the resources of the police on. Okay, the loud music that's on the thing on the book that says, you're not supposed to have no loud music. Well, we're not going to bother to use the police for that. We're not going to bother to use police. But the numbers are causing murders. Okay, so but now we're going to put the police to deal with the murders, when maybe we could have prevented some of those if we had just stuck to the law on the book that said it is illegal. And I mean, just because the world, and going back now into the thing, the two countries, and so funny as you were talking, I was thinking about the country just named Singapore. I was thinking about them and their laws, and how come they have been able to enforce. And I'm not saying, because a lot of them are really, I deem really extreme. But why have they been able to uphold and only have 3 prime ministers? The continuation of not having to turn over, and everybody's trying to get in to do something. And to keep me on track, because when I get to talking about this, I can go right off. But if we don't do the little minor things and keep those minor laws that's in place, for instance, you come in town and you look around now, and people are walking around, their butts are hanging out, their breasts is hanging out, and there's a law on the books. When there were people like Anna Holder and Berkeley Bush and all those people in there, and Jim Barton and all those people, we didn't have that. We enforced those laws. Yes, there were minor stuff, but those minor things is what is now causing the major problems in our country.
I am going to use the Bible to answer this question.
Let me see how well.
I'm going to use Hebrews chapter 7, reading from verse 11 to 15, thereabouts. And I could be a little bit wrong, but I think it's in the book of Hebrews, and I think it's from 7:11 to 15. But basically what they spoke about in that Bible verse, when they talk about the people who received the law under the order of Melchizedek. And they basically said that because a new priest arise, they also basically need new laws to some extent. And I think there's a part that says that if the old is not faultless, there'll be no need for the new. Somewhere along that line, I believe, is in the book of Hebrews. You can check it from Katina. But I say that to say this. We go back to laws that was written at a time when Cayman was, quote unquote, the island of time for God. The minute that the Cayman Islands...
How I wish we still were.
Well, no, but they say, this is always comes to the issue, and
yes.
The minute you decide, well, you know what? I'm going to go into the cruise business to employ people. Now, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, I'm 51 next month, when a certain ship that was coming here with a certain lifestyle.
Yes, I remember.
Where I think Jim Borden, whoever it was,
no,
went.
it was Mr.
Truman.
No, Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Where they basically, I think.
And Mr. Jim Borden. Yes, correct.
Where they basically went and basically called the Legislative Assembly, did what they needed to do to basically stop the ship was coming here. That was back in the 80s.
Late 80s. Yes.
You try that now, you all of a sudden, international press, you have all these different associations, then you hear the Cayman Islands is abusing this and that, human rights and the whole 9 yards, and whatever you want to call it. I say all of that to say this. This is unfortunate sometimes when you have development and it is not managed correctly.
Exactly.
And I think,
agree with that.
And one of the things about it is that I can equally say, and this is one of the reasons why I've never ever criticized previous politicians, because at the end of the day, we make decisions based on the information that we have at the time. Now, hindsight is always 2020, where you can look back to say, well, I shouldn't have done that. I can say to you right now on this show, there was one, in my 2 years in government, there was one piece of legislation that I carried to Parliament that it weighed very heavily on me to do it. And I can honestly say to people, I have regretted carrying a piece of legislation to Parliament. In my gut feeling, I had an issue with it, but I was looking at the broader picture. You're going by the advice of everything that people are giving you at the time, and okay, fine. Based on that advice, based on that information, you made that decision. But deep down inside, I kind of was a little bit uncomfortable with it, and I really wish I had put my foot down and carried through with it. And I can tell you, which one it was. It was basically the mandatory vaccination on expatriates, on expats. I deep down inside, and it's funny because the other day I was going through my library and I came across the book My Life with Bill Clinton, volume 1 and volume 2. And volume 2 actually started with his presidency. And one of the very first issues that he had to deal with in his presidency, the first major issue, was the issue in Waco, Texas with the Camp Davidian cult. And Janet Reno and everyone was telling him, Mr. President, you have to storm the compound, you got to restore law and order because, the longer you make these people out there make it look as if the federal government has no say, no pull on anything. And he reluctantly went ahead with it, and then 3 people perished. And he said, that was something that haunted him for the rest of his life. And because he was the one who gave the order. And he vowed at that moment to never ever again go against his gut feeling. And I can honestly say, looking back at it now, I can relate to that. Because now you look at the UK Parliament where they're having these committee meetings on excessive debts and so forth. And we've seen in our own community now, some healthy people. No, I'm not saying that that's the cause. But deep down inside, for me, that was one of the things that I really had an issue with. And like I said, you take the information at the time. Now 15, 20 years from now, someone can come back and criticize, well, Chris shouldn't have done this and Chris shouldn't have done that. But again, you make it based on information you had at the time. You know what I mean? And gut feeling, unfortunately, have no place in scientific fact. It has no place in policies or anything like that, where you just have your gut feeling, like you have 2 devils on your shoulders, that kind of thing. I mean, that has no place when you're managing a country, running a country. You can only go by the information that you have. But what that does say to me at the end of the day was, I'm going to make sure, if I'm ever in that position again, that the people that we have around us that's giving us that advice are people who are qualified to do so. And I think, if anything, I look at Dr. Tomlinson. He flagged it. He raised a lot of issues. He raised a lot of issues with it. And in fairness, history has proven him to be correct in many cases. You know what I mean? So it is not as if though, but yet, it goes back to this point. Here we have our own homegrown doctor that we invested in that understands our own thing, but yet we had someone
from outside
advising us.
That's right.
And and this is one of the things that we as Caymanians need to make sure that we recognize, again, our own people, our own talent, because guess what? The person who's advised us is gone. But guess who's still here?
We are still here.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, Chris, as you prefer to be called, I think that's a good place for us to stop this afternoon's discussion. But I would like for us to continue the discussion on that very point about the vaccination program, and in hindsight, and the rest of the concerns that we have here in the Cayman Islands. So I just want to invite you all to stay tuned to a good show, and we'll continue this discussion on the next episode of A Good Show. Thank you so very much for staying tuned here on A Good Show. Join us again next week for part 2 of the discussion with the Honourable Christopher Saunders next Sunday at 7 p.m. Sis, you want to tell them?
That will be on Cayman Life TV, channel 33, Logic.
7 p.m. on Sundays and Tuesdays.
A Good Show is brought to you by the kind donations of private sponsors like yourselves and the support of companies such as Media Warehouse, 7 Miles of Grace, H. Philippi Bank's Attorney at Law, Dragonfly Cayman, and others. To become a sponsor, an advertiser, or to make a donation, email agoodshow@christian.ky.